Nvidia is scheduled to report quarterly financial results on February 26th, and Nvidia's earnings results have become the most anticipated for stock market investors for more than 4 quarters now. It's the most anticipated earnings release. Nearly every stock market participant will be watching for what Nvidia stock reports in its quarterly earnings update. In this video, I'll highlight 8 very important numbers that Nvidia stock investors and stock market investors overall need to know from Nvidia's earnings release. These are the critical numbers you cannot afford to miss. I'm going to share those with you in this video. Let's take a look.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.
All right, starting with the forecast. Nvidia has told investors to expect revenue of about $37.5 billion in the upcoming quarter. That's certainly one number investors need to watch. The gross profit margin, they are forecasting at 73%, and the GAAP operating expenses to be about 4.8 billion and non-GAAP operating expenses at 3.4 billion. All right, so if Nvidia does indeed report $37.5 billion in revenue in this upcoming quarter, that would be growth of 69.68% compared to the same quarter last year. Remember, in the fourth quarter 2024, Nvidia reported $22 billion in revenue, $3.2 billion in operating income, and 76% in gross margin. So if they do deliver $37.5 billion, that would be growth of about 70% year over year. Operating expenses would be up by roughly 50% year over year, and the gross margin would be down by almost 300 basis points. That's something to keep a close eye on, these three numbers. Now, if Nvidia reports $38 billion in revenue, that would be revenue growth of about 72%. Let me go back to the $37.5 billion number. For several consecutive quarters now, Nvidia has beat its own revenue projections and exceeded their own guidance. I wouldn't be surprised if they exceed their guidance again. Based on the data I've been getting from companies that Nvidia is selling into, they've all reported significant increases in their spending in this critical category, a category that Nvidia sells into. The gross profit margin, this is a key number. The reason Nvidia said that the gross margin is declining year over year is because they are ramping up their new technology, their new Blackwell technology, which they're still not producing at full scale. They're still ramping it up. This is something investors are keeping a close eye on, and it's critically important because remember, Nvidia a little while ago said that they are now every 1 year upgrading their technology. So prior to this Blackwell technology that's coming out right now, they had the Hopper technology. And so now this year it's the Blackwell technology. They will still be selling the Hopper, but they're now ramping up the Blackwell. And in the early stages, you're not generating the maximum gross profit margin because you're not producing at full tilt. So you're not generating the full economies in scale. Perhaps in the next few quarters, they will increase their margins, but for now, they're saying that it's going to decline year over year. The magnitude of the decrease is important. If Nvidia, they're forecasting 73%. If they deliver 74% or 75% instead, that will be a solid upside for the stock. Investors will be pleased with that result. If for some reason this number should dip into the 60s, should it be 68% or 69%, you might see a considerable downside in the stock because that would indicate growing troubles in the ramping of the new technology. And remember, that's one of the bigger risks now. It was already risky for Nvidia to develop new technology every 2 years and keep up with that pace of innovation. It's not an easy thing to do. But now they're trying to do it every 1 year instead of every 2 years. And now they're a much larger business than they were 4 years ago. So the degree of difficulty has increased exponentially in these last 2 to 3 years for Nvidia. They've been executing almost to perfection. And that's one of the reasons why the stock price soared as much as it's been soaring, is because they've handled this increase in demand almost perfectly. And that's not an easy thing to do. And when you do that, the stock market rewards you, as Nvidia has been rewarded. But investors are concerned now that Nvidia may not be able to keep up with that phenomenal performance. And they're already seeing clues, right? You saw the rumors of the Blackwell technology not working as well, overheating potentially, yield improvements. They needed to change a couple of things. And so investors are skeptical that Nvidia can continue executing at this perfection for the foreseeable future. This gross margin number will be an indicator of that. It'll be an indicator of their ability to switch technology every year and do it flawlessly. So that's a key number to look out for. So another thing to look out for, just as Nvidia provided the fourth quarter fiscal year 2025 outlook in the third quarter report, so they forecast the upcoming quarter, right? So, along with the fourth quarter results that will be released, they will also very likely release the forecast for the first quarter of 2026 in a similar format where they will give you the forecast for revenue, for gross margin, and for operating expenses. So, those are three additional numbers that NVIDIA stock investors need to watch extremely closely, because they can deliver great results for the fourth quarter, but if the forecast is disappointing, that could cause the stock price to fall. Right? So the forecast is sometimes even more important than the actual results in the quarter. That's why these numbers are also critical. So let's evaluate those now. So in the fiscal first quarter of 2025, Nvidia reported revenue of 26 billion. Now I'm estimating that they're going to forecast revenue of 40 billion for the first quarter of 2026. That would be up from, if they do indeed report 37.5 billion for the fourth quarter of 2025, that would be a $2.5 billion incremental increase, and it would be about 54% higher than what they reported in the first quarter of 2025. If Nvidia reports a forecast guidance that's below $40 billion for the upcoming quarter, I think investors will be very disappointed. I don't think that's very likely. If anything, I think Nvidia might forecast something above $40 billion for the first quarter. If they do 40 billion, that would be a growth rate of 54%, which would continue the trend line of Nvidia's revenue growth rate decelerating, right? They can't continue growing at 200% year over year. That was the initial ramp up of the technology. Now the growth rates are likely to slow down, and that's okay. But what investors would like to see is that the pace of deceleration slow down. So don't dramatically slow down, but slow down more incrementally. And so investors, if they see a forecast of $42 billion, which would be a growth rate of 61.5%, I think investors would be pleased with that forecast. I think investors would be pleased with anything $42 billion and above. A forecast of $40 billion, I think, would be a neutral forecast that would not please or displease investors. 42 billion, I think, would be pleasing to be sure. Operating expenditures, I think they'll forecast 5.2 billion in OpEx. The operating expenditures number, the details are what's going to be important. If Nvidia says we're going to be spending more on research and development, I think investors would be happy about that. It depends where the operating expenditures line items come in at. More importantly will be the gross profit margin number. In the first quarter of 2025, they reported gross margins of 78.4%. Now, I'm forecasting that for the first quarter estimate, they provide a gross margin outlook of 74%. 74% is what I'm forecasting. However, if they suggest anything at 75 or 76%, 76% is the key number, because that would be returning to that 76% number from Q4 2024. If they can be closer to 75 or 76%, I think investors will be very pleased with that number as well. So the gross profit margin number is going to be critical for Nvidia stock investors. If it's below 73%, if it's below 73%, if it's closer to 72, and if it approaches in the 60s, if the number has a 6 in front of it, that will cause a considerable disappointment from stock market investors. So when you're looking at that outlook, you better hope to see a 7 in front of it. A 7, and then the second number hopefully is a 5 or above, but a 4 would also be okay. 74% would also be okay. Again, the reason for the decline is ramping up that next generation technology and the pace of that ramp up. If they're able to ramp it up quicker than expected, then that gross margin could be much higher than expected, because Nvidia still commands premium prices for its products. It still commands premium prices because they're sold out for several quarters into the future. So if customers want this technology, they have to pay Nvidia what they're asking. So it's a matter of Nvidia's production side being able to produce at the scale that lowers the cost per unit so that they can generate those great margins. Remember, a gross margin on a hardware product at over 70% is remarkable, to be sure. But again, all of those those remarkable insights about Nvidia's business are already getting priced into the valuation. So investors have come to expect this from Nvidia already. So there you have it. These are the 8 critical numbers for Nvidia stock investors to watch in the upcoming earnings release. And of course, if you want to know if the stock is a buy, hold, or a sell before the upcoming earnings, I've made a video about that, which is probably popping up on your screen right here. You can click and watch that. Did you know that over 90% of the people that watch my channel are not subscribed? It'll really help support my channel if you hit that subscribe button. And oh, by the way, one of the benefits of being subscribed is that I take requests from subscribers more often than I do from non-subscribers. So if you prefer that benefit, please subscribe to the channel.